Hey guys, Will here. So overnight, Logitech announced their new G923 Racing Wheel, and it's hard to believe that it's been 5 years since the G29 and G920 came out. Now, there's been a lot of chatter on the internet today. A lot of people are a little bit disappointed, let's just say, about it not being a direct drive wheel. That's one thing I've seen people complaining about a bit. We'll talk about that a bit in just a moment. But also just the fact that it looks fundamentally very, very similar to the previous model. And a lot of people are saying, you know, we haven't had a new wheel from Logitech for, 10, 15 years now. And look, that's really not the case. So there are quite a few new features in this new wheel that I want to dive into today. And in particular, I want to talk about this new Trueforce force feedback engine that they're talking about in their marketing. And basically unpack that for you guys and explain exactly how that works and why it's something that could actually be really, really cool. But yeah, look, I don't actually have one of these wheels in front of me here to review for you guys. I just want to say that straight off the bat here. Unfortunately, one of the perks of living in Australia, or one of the detractors from living in Australia, I should say, is that we do tend to get our hands on equipment a little bit after some of the other countries around the world. I have spoken to Logitech this morning, and they are going to send me out one to review as soon as they possibly can. They simply just don't have any stock here in Australia available at the moment, as that's what they told me anyway. So yeah, we'll get our hands on one as soon as we possibly can. But nonetheless, there should be plenty of useful information within this video. So I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's get stuck into it here. We'll jump onto the website and we'll run through all this new information. So you can see here, Logitech G923. We only have one model number, so to speak, this time. We do still have two different versions available though. And you can see here, we have a PlayStation version with the PlayStation buttons. So the triangle, square, circle, and cross or X. And then the PlayStation buttons down here. Over on the other side, we have the Xbox version with the Y, X, B, and A, as well as the Xbox button down the bottom. So interesting that they don't have two separate model numbers this time. Hopefully that won't confuse anybody, but they are fundamentally the same wheel as each other, just the PlayStation and the Xbox licensed version. And importantly as well, these are both going to be compatible with the next gen consoles. Obviously that would be expected at this point, but just to clarify that for you guys as well. So two different versions, same model name. You just need to make sure you choose the right one for the right platform, and they are both PC compatible as well. Otherwise, all the other functionality is exactly the same between the two of them. So what exactly is new on this wheel? So we'll start off here with some of the key features that they're calling out. So feel the future of sim racing. Meet the next generation of racing wheels. The award-winning Logitech G design is re-engineered to dial in your game physics, delivering unprecedented realism. Unprecedented realism is a pretty big call for a entry-level wheel, but we'll see. We'll find out once we review one just how good it is. Feel the pistons pumping, the gravel crunching, and every shift, drift, and hairpin turn like never before. So that is sort of tying in with this Trueforce next generation force feedback that they're talking about, which we'll unpack in just a moment. But let's just quickly run through some of the other new mechanical features before we move on. So premium build, aluminium, steel, and leather. So it does have new stitching on the wheel, I believe. The old G920, G29 had a single row of stitching or a single join in the leather. You can see it's got the same aluminium centering line up the top and the same overall look and feel to the leather with the little indentations or perforations there to reduce your sweaty hands as well. Now, one other feature that they're mentioning here as a call out is their dual clutch launch assist control. This is a software-based thing, I believe. I don't think that these paddles are using Hall sensors or potentiometers or anything like that. I think they are still just micro switches. So it must be a software-based thing for that launch assist control. But that's something else that we'll definitely check out once we get our hands on one. And then scrolling down a little bit further, we've got a little bit more information on Trueforce, which we'll have a look at in just a moment. But then we can see here, we do have the same fundamental internal design. So a gear-driven system, dual motor system, exactly like we had with the G920 and G29 as well. I don't know for a fact that they are exactly the same motors, but from what I've read and what I've seen from people who have reviewed this wheel already, it seems like the overall strength is about the same at around that sort of 2 to 3 Newton meters. But we have had some pretty significant upgrades in terms of the software side of things, firmware, and how the physics or how the force feedback is actually generated. So you can see here it says right current means the right torque. G923 advanced firmware monitors all the current flowing through the wheel's motors, continuously adjusting voltage to match outputs for game physics. So again, it's tying into that game physics thing. And now this is where it starts to get interesting. By going beyond the default settings, G923 delivers pinpoint accuracy and unprecedented realism. So scrolling down a little bit more, we'll get to the pedals because that's where the other, I guess, not major, but subtle difference is. So the pedals overall look exactly the same as the previous models, but they have got a new progressive spring in the brake pedal, which does supposedly improve the feel at brake pedal. And obviously we'll talk about that when we review it as well. But look, I've seen a few people complain about the fact that the design is exactly the same in terms of the pedals and the overall wheel. And I think that this is a good move, and that might sound weird to some people, but there are a lot of aftermarket accessories available for the G920 and the G29 already. Load cell upgrades, spring upgrades, things like that. And I think that by keeping the design the same, what it means is that they're able to keep the price low and still have compatibility with a lot of those aftermarket accessories for people that do want to upgrade later on. So, rather than buying this new wheel and then not having any load cells or not having any spring upgrades or anything like that available, theoretically, at least you should be able to use those upgrades that you had for your G920 or G29 directly on the new G923, and they should work. So yeah, I can understand why people are a little bit upset, and I can understand why people are saying, oh, it's just the same thing all over again, but I can see the reasons why they've done that, and I do think overall it's a good thing because it allows that clear upgrade path for people that just want to spend the minimum amount of money and get the wheel. That's perfectly fine, they can do that. But if you already have some upgrades for your G920 or G29, or maybe you're looking at doing a load cell upgrade or something like that, there's going to be a whole range of accessories that are already available in the aftermarket that should work with this wheel. But anyway, let's scroll back up to what everybody's talking about at the moment, and that is the new Trueforce technology. So we'll scroll back up to old mate Alonso here. Looking forward to seeing him back in Formula One again next year. So Trueforce next generation simulation. Our latest innovation in force feedback technology connects directly to in-game simulation engines and physics to produce higher fidelity real-time responses. The feedback frequency range is also increased for dramatically improved detail and realism compared to previous generations. So if we click on more information on Trueforce technology, let's scroll down a little bit here as well. So next gen high definition force feedback. Logitech G is bringing e-racing physics to life so you can feel every shift, drift and hairpin turn with mind-blowing realism. So a couple of key points here. We've got a polling rate of 1000 cycles per second, or a refresh rate of 1 kilohertz in other terms. Now, previously wheels of this caliber or this price point didn't actually advertise their sample rate. The lowest level wheel that actually did was the CSL Elite from Fnatic, and that has the same polling rate as this at 1000 cycles per second. Now, what's important to understand here is this is the communication rate across the USB interface. So why this is important to understand is that the physics engines that actually run in the back end through a lot of the sim racing software don't run at anywhere near this sample rate. So for example, iRacing runs at 60 hertz, Assetto Corsa Competizione is 344 hertz, I think it is from memory. So they do vary in their sample rates, and obviously the faster the sample rate, the more smooth the detail is going to be in the force feedback because you've got less of a gap between packets of information. But having a higher sample rate or polling rate should definitely help improve the feel over the previous generation. So that is good. Then game physics direct sim integration. We're going to talk about this in more detail in just a moment. And then vibro tactile, more precise realism. So whatever that's meant to mean, I don't know. But again, if we scroll down here, you can see that dual motor design that looks pretty much exactly the same as the previous generations. We can see the little Trueforce logo on the side though. So reading through this force feedback revolutionized blurb here, this is where we're going to start getting into a little bit more detail on exactly how all this stuff works. So what do we have here? Force feedback revolutionized. Trueforce changes the game. While other racing wheels simplify and downgrade game physics, Logitech G delivers the first high definition force feedback steering wheel with precisely controlled forces and an unprecedented update rate. So yeah, maybe that's a little bit of an embellishment compared to some of the higher end gear that we've seen here on Boosted Media, but yeah, look, it's probably true for a wheel of this price point at least. And then it goes on to say most racing wheels still operate on 20-year-old force feedback technology where forces and vibrations are created from a selection of profiles and a limited library of haptic effects. Now, yeah, maybe that's a little bit of an embellishment. I do understand what they're saying though, and fundamentally that is true. We'll unpack that in just a moment for you, but let's just push on here. Designed to overcome the limitations of early USB technology and single core CPUs, they were used to approximate the sensations generated from your sim car. This means the carefully calculated physics from the game can be simplified and degraded. Not Trueforce. We developed high-speed, real-time haptics software technology derived from surgical force feedback systems with enough bandwidth to deliver detailed game physics right to your G923, so you feel everything. So, okay, what this is talking about here when it says 20-year-old force feedback technology. It's talking about direct input API. So if we scroll across now to another tab here, you guys who've been watching this channel for a while would have seen me talk about this before. And I've done other videos, which I've linked in the description below for you guys, where we've talked about exactly how force feedback works and how that information from the sim gets into your hands through the API and all the physics and all that sort of things. But look, for the purpose of this video, I just want to quickly skim over this for you. So what they're saying is true. The Microsoft Direct Input API has been around for 20 years now, and it was developed originally for force feedback through things like vibration motors. So it is fundamentally pretty basic in how it works, and it's derived of 4 different types of effects. So we've got a constant force, or a constant force in a single direction, a ramping force, or a force that increases or decreases in magnitude, a periodic effect, or a force that pulsates according to a wave pattern, so it's things like ripple strips, and then a conditional force, or a force that reacts to emotional position along an axis. So these are forces that are like the reaction to you putting in steering effort. So you're turning in and the wheel's sort of fighting against you when you're counter steering, things like that. So different sims use these effects in different ways. And this is where I think I disagree with what Logitech is saying here, because yes, while the technology is 20 years old, the way that this has been implemented has come in leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. So back in the day, a lot of these effects that you would feel through sim racing titles were called canned effects. So basically, it's kind of like a sound recording, and every time you go over a ripple strip or a bump or rub with other cars, it's like a sound file that's playing back through the wheel. And all they're doing is just varying the frequency or the duration and the amplitude or the strength of the effect that's coming through the wheel. But you can think of it kind of like an MP3 file or a WAV file or something like that that's playing through the wheel to generate those effects. So those mean that you have quite a level of consistency between the effects. You don't get all that much variation. Whereas a lot of sims these days, so, you know, Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example, that's actually using physics-based force feedback. So it's using the data that's being generated by the physics engine to then create the effects that are being outputted. And it is using the direct input API to do this, but it's not necessarily a limitation, so to speak. So yes, it is 20-year-old technology, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the way it's been implemented in today's modern sims is old or by any means inferior. What it does mean, though, is that this new technology is able to take advantage of the telemetry data that's available within the sim. But if we go back to that last sentence in the second paragraph here, this means the carefully calculated physics from the game can be simplified and degraded. Yeah, that is true, they can be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they always are. So I just want to make sure that that's absolutely clear. Now, just going through this last little paragraph here again, we developed a high-speed real-time haptics software technology derived from surgical force feedback systems with enough bandwidth to deliver detailed game physics right to your G923 so you feel everything. So what that's saying is that it's using the game's telemetry data to generate effects that are above and beyond what it would be normally available through the direct input interface or API. So interestingly, this isn't something that is entirely new to sim racing. Now, those of you who've used haptic feedback type devices like transducers, Butt Kicker Gamer 2, for example, wind simulation, all those sorts of peripherals that you can add on to a sim rig, those all use a similar system to generate their haptic feedback. So to explain this a little bit more, what I have in front of me here now is a little program called Simhub, which I think is one of the best things that ever happened to sim racing. This is an absolutely brilliant piece of software, but this is the software that I use to drive all sorts of peripherals on my sim rig. So I use it for my digital dash, I use it for my gauges that you can see the side of just here, I use it for my wind simulation. So I actually have a fan system on this rig that varies the wind speed based on the motion in the sim. It's even used for things like the Butt Kicker Gamer 2 to generate all of those effects. And you can see here, there's a whole bunch of different effects that are available that we can manipulate and output through various different physical peripherals. So we've got custom effect here, so that's a custom effect that we can use. Scrolling up a little bit here, we just missed acceleration G-force. We've got deceleration G-force, RPM. So this is one thing they've talked about specifically with the G923, being able to feel engine RPMs through the wheel. So we have that available in Simhub here. Gear grinding, gear shifting, road impacts, road rumble, road vibration and textures, speed with curving, wheel locking, wheel slip. So effects like ABS, tire slip, all those things are all possible. And those are all details that are generated by the game's physics engine, at least in modern sims anyway. And then that information is outputted via UDP telemetry, and that can be used by third-party software to generate effects through third-party peripherals. So this is effectively what Logitech are doing through their Trueforce API, but interestingly, they're using their own API to do this rather than just using the UDP telemetry. So if we scroll down here a little bit further past old mate Alonso, you can see here at the time of launch, at least, the only games that it's going to be compatible with are Grid, Assetto Corsa Competizione, and Gran Turismo Sport. That's in terms of the Trueforce force feedback on top of the normal direct input feedback. So it's interesting that they're not using the raw telemetry data via UDP to do this. They're using their own API. And I don't really know the reason for that. I don't know whether there's going to be additional information available above and beyond. We do know that this is something that does need to be implemented by the game developers themselves. So that would kind of lend itself towards potentially having a little bit more detail, a little bit more data that's available to it, but we can't really elaborate on that too much yet because we just don't know. But what I can tell you is that it's not a fundamentally new concept, so to speak. There are plenty of software packages out there that use the UDP telemetry data to generate effects above and beyond what you normally feel through that direct input. Now, another example of this as well is with Fanatics Fanalab software. So while that is relatively basic, and at the moment all it's using is the speed data out of the telemetry to vary the amount of damper effect based on the vehicle's speed in the sim, that is fundamentally the same type of technology that's being used by Fanatec to what Logitech are talking about here. So it's not a fundamentally new concept, so to speak. I just wanted to make sure that was clarified. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further here, old mate Alonso is telling us that Trueforce delivers directly rendered kinesthetic tactile force feedback calculated internally at up to 4,000 Hertz right to your G923, delivering an immersive real racing experience. Tactile feedback lets you feel everything with fine-tuned nuanced vibrational effects, road surfaces, terrain changes, tire contact, weather. Kinesthetic effects let you feel tire grip, bumps, crashes, and G-forces so you can react quicker and win the race. So there you go. That's pretty much exactly what we were just talking about. All those same effects that we just saw that are available in Simhub are going to be available through this. So interestingly here, what it's saying about it's allowing you to react quicker. Now, the jury's a little bit out on this one because a lot of the time, many of these types of effects don't necessarily, they're not necessarily fundamental to feeling what's going on with the car. Things like, feeling engine RPM through the wheel and stuff like that can actually be distracting from the overall sensation of force feedback. Really what you want to feel is just the movement of the car underneath you, and anything above and beyond that can actually be distracting at times. Now, I'm not trying to sort of detract from this at all. I think this is definitely going to be a big leap forward in terms of realism and immersion. But just keep in mind that a lot of the really, really fast guys in sim racing actually choose to use lower end equipment simply because they're only feeling the things that they need to feel to go quickly. Obviously things like muscle memory are fundamentally important to sim racing. And the more fine-tuned the information is that you're feeling, the more you're able to sort of focus on what's important and go fast and be consistent. So if we scroll down a little bit further here, we do have the option in the software to fine tune a lot of this. And I think we'll find that a lot of people will end up turning this down once they get past that initial kind of wow factor and I guess novelty of the additional force feedback. But yeah, we'll dive into more details on the software side of things once we actually have the wheel in front of us and can fine tune it and feel for ourselves what's going on. But yeah, look, I'm really excited to see what this is going to feel like. I think that it could be a really big step forward, but I just want to make sure that you guys understand that this isn't something that is fundamentally new to sim racing, although it is new to entry-level wheels. So it's definitely a positive step forward, and I'm certainly not trying to take away from that by any means. And I am very excited to test out the wheel. So yeah, I mean, nothing they're saying here is fundamentally incorrect or misleading by any means. I mean, it says, they're very careful with their words there. They're saying, while other racing wheels simplify and downgrade game physics. So it's not saying every other wheel does this, it's saying other wheels do this, and this is absolutely true. So personally, I'm really genuinely looking forward to trying out this Trueforce technology for myself and seeing exactly what it brings to the table. Now, one other thing I want to just touch on quickly, hardware-wise, before we do move on here is, the fact that a lot of people are disappointed that this isn't a direct drive wheel. Now, direct drive has become a bit of a buzzword in the industry, and I talked about this in a little bit more detail when we did our wheelbases explained video a little while back. So I'll link that in the description for you guys now. But, direct drive has become one of those things that people say, and it's sort of become synonymous with high-end sim racing gear. Now, what people need to understand is that direct drive doesn't necessarily automatically mean good. All it means is that the wheel is connected directly to the motor. So whatever the motor is outputting is what you feel through your hands. Now, historically, belt-driven and gear-driven wheels have the advantage of using a gearbox system or a pulley system to increase the amount of torque that's available through the wheel from a lower torque motor. So that comes at the cost of response time and overall acceleration and speed, but you do get more torque in the force feedback that you're feeling. So that is, you know, essentially what allows us to use cheaper equipment or cheaper hardware to produce a stronger force feedback feeling. You know, what people need to understand is that, you know, when you're building something to a price like that, these industrial servo motors that we see in these high-end direct drive wheelbases are extremely expensive. And if you were to take a cheap motor and make it direct drive, not only would it be weak, but you'd be feeling a lot of graininess and a lot of notchiness and, you know, things like torque ripple and, you know, effects like that we've talked about previously on the channel. And it really wouldn't be a good overall experience. So to go direct drive for something like this, you know, there would absolutely have to be an increase in price as well. And that's what I think people need to understand. So I'm not disappointed that this isn't direct drive. I think there is still space for Logitech to potentially get into the direct drive market, but we're not going to see that, at least at this point with the technology the way it is right now as of 2020. We're not going to see a $700 or $500 direct drive wheel that is able to offer the same experience as you get from something like, say, a VRS direct drive wheel or a Fanatic or a Simhub or something like that. It's just simply not possible with the technology that's available at the moment and how much it costs to actually produce those. And I mean, a good example of that we've talked about before on the channel is the SimMagic wheel. So the SimMagic M10 that we tested a while back, you know, that was very, very good for the price in many ways, but it did have that underlying notchy feel, and you could just tell that it was a cheaper motor that they were using because it was. And, you know, in fairness to that wheel, it is an entry-level direct drive wheel and it performs like one. So, you know, to produce something that was going to cost $500, you know, it'd be another step down from that. And I honestly believe that the overall experience of using a direct drive wheel in that price point would be worse than a cog-driven or belt-driven counterpart. So that's the reason, at least in my opinion, why we're not seeing this being a direct drive wheel. And I think that people need to sort of try to get out of their head that direct drive automatically means better, because it really comes down to the quality of the components that are being used internally. So I just wanted to clarify that, guys, before we finish up this video. But I really do hope that you found this interesting and insightful. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this new wheel brings to the table. I'm really excited to see particularly what this Trueforce feels like in the real world, whether it turns out to be a bit of a gimmick or whether it's something that genuinely adds to the overall immersion of this sim racing experience. So leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, guys. And yeah, I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.